Have you ever had a passion project and found that when you explained it to others, they didn't know what it was? That's what happened to me when I tried to join a choral speaking group here in Oakville, and no one knew what choral speaking was. This podcast is the story of how I tried to put together my own choral speaking group. I'm Kathy Bullock, and you're listening to In Search of Choral Speaking in Oakville. So, what is choral speaking? Choral speaking is speaking in unison. You've heard a choir sings. In choral speaking, you speak. It's usually a poem, but it doesn't have to be. When I was in high school, I was part of a youth choral speaking group. Many schools had gotten together to prepare a choral speaking performance for the Queen, who was visiting, Queen Elizabeth, before she passed away. I can't remember if I auditioned or if I was selected. I don't remember anything about the poem that we did, the rehearsals, but I do have this memory of standing on stage at the Perth Concert Hall and doing this choral speaking performance. I couldn't remember what year it was, so I decided to look it up. Had Queen Elizabeth visited Perth? And the answer that came up was yes, in 1954. Well, that was too early for me in high school. In 1988, that was too late for me in high school. In 2011, I started to wonder, maybe it hadn't been the Queen that we were performing for. Maybe it was Prince Philip. So I found another link, Royal Tours of Australia. That was its title. And there was a one-liner that Queen Elizabeth had visited in 1981. So that coincides. I was in grade 9 in 1981. And then I had a look, I typed another search term, did the Queen visit Perth in 1981? And it turned out, yes, she had. And not only that, it had the itinerary. I started to look at the itinerary. So she started in Melbourne, then she was at sea, then she went to Hobart, which is on the island of Tasmania. Then she went to Adelaide, which is in South Australia, and finally to Perth. And I was scrolling the itinerary, day 1, morning, evening, and I was like, what if I have this false memory? It's just something I made up. And then I scrolled on to day 2, AM, quote, attend a concert given by West Australian school children, Perth Concert Hall. That was it. That was me. I was there at that concert given by West Australian school children at the Perth Concert Hall with other schools. So this was grade 9. Actually, that was that in Perth. This is second year high school. It's actually older than I remembered being. I decided to have a look at the Perth Concert Hall. In my memory, it's pretty much the only concert hall in the city, but maybe it's not. Maybe it wasn't, or maybe it was then, but is no longer. Apparently, it opened in 1973. It was the first concert hall to be built in Australia after World War II. Apparently a structure that was completely innovative for the time, and it's renowned for having one of the finest acoustics in the Southern Hemisphere. It's also home to the resident company of the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, or WASO, that my cousin Jane plays violin for. Perth Concert Hall was also rented by my high school, Presbyterian Ladies College, for our end-of-year assemblies. I can't remember if we called them assemblies or what we called them. But our end-of-year event, they gave out the awards of the year. There were performances, the choir, the orchestra, the band. And I remember doing there a rhythmic gymnastics performance one year. It's apparently undergoing massive renovations, and it will open again in 2028. So that my choral speaking memory turns out to be a true memory, which I'm actually very glad to know. Fast forward about 20 years, I remember leading a youth group in a choral speaking performance for the end of year. It was a weekend school, extracurricular school. We had an end of year performance for the parents, and I decided to do with my youth group a choral speaking performance. I can't remember anything about what poem we chose, about the rehearsals. After 20 years, how did I even know how to teach choral speaking to a group? I have no idea what I did. But I do know that it was fun. The parents enjoyed it, they enjoyed it, I enjoyed it, and it was an empowering experience. Then life happens. I got busy, had moved to Canada. We ended up in Oakville, which is in Ontario, 30 kilometres west of Toronto, Canada's biggest city, about 6 million people, which is about 6 times the population of Perth when I grew up there, had around 1 million people. There's marriage, then there's 3 kids, study, work. I forgot all about choral speaking until a few years ago, just around the COVID lockdown time. Getting close to retirement and you starting to reminisce about things you enjoyed doing in the past. And I remembered choral speaking. I suddenly missed it. I thought, let's join a group. So I looked for Oakville Choral Speaking, Mississauga Choral Speaking, Ontario Choral Speaking, and the unexpected obstacles began. Nothing was showing up. I'd done an improv class and I asked my teacher, is there an Oakville Choral Speaking group? She directed me to a link. I was very excited, click on it, and what is it? It turns out to be a choir. So I started asking my friends. I thought, okay, maybe I could just get a group of people together and we can, do choral speaking together. And no one had ever heard of it. Choral what? Is it my accent? Is it a regional Australian word like rubbish versus garbage? I did a Google search and no, it's not a regional word. Choral speaking brings up entries. In fact, I discovered that Indonesia and Malaysia have national choral speaking competitions. But it's not just a Canadian thing. Immigrants that I asked from the UK, from Pakistan, from Egypt and India, they hadn't heard of it either. I'm starting to think maybe if I went back and asked people in Perth, maybe they wouldn't have heard of it either too. I tried to get people to, join a group, but no one was that interested in trying out something when they didn't really know what it was. I started to wonder, close to retirement, should I really try and start something new? Am I too old? Too old to start something new? I asked a few friends, do you think being in your mid-50s is too old to start a new project? And everyone said no. They know people who after retirement, they go back to university or college, they go back to a hobby that they've always enjoyed but didn't have time for. So no, it's not too old, and everyone encouraged me. I thought of a name, the Oakville Women's Choral Speaking Society, and I kept asking people, will you join? Will you join? And they're like, choral what? Finally, I decided to ask my Toastmasters Club members. After all, I thought they're already interested in public speaking, but would they have time? I mean, maybe 2 clubs is too much extracurricular activity for busy working people. A couple of members said yes, but next year, because this year they were busy. And so it went on for a couple of years until one magical night in December 2024, 3 new members of my Toastmasters Club said yes, they would be interested. One said they could get us a room, and we all agreed to meet the next weekend. I'm pinching myself. Would this actually work? We'll find out next episode, Day 1 of Choral Speaking in Oakville. You've been listening to my podcast, In Search of Choral Speaking in Oakville. Today I shared my dream of reliving something I enjoyed doing in high school, which was choral speaking, and my difficulty of finding a group to join in the city I live now, called Oakville, which is in Ontario, Canada. Don't get fooled by my Australian accent. Let me know in the comments if you've had any experiences with choral speaking. Next episode, we'll drop in on our first rehearsal and see how it went. Until then, stay safe, stay well. I'm Kathy Bullock, and I've been your host for this podcast.